Hey guys, so this week we're going to be talking about animals, and the first thing that we're going to talk about are going to be invertebrates. But first, let's back up and let's figure out what makes an animal an animal. So, if you remember back to the protist, when we told you that they were animal like, that meant that they had locomotion and that they were heterotrophic, taking in the energy from the outside. Today, we're going to talk about what makes an animal different from an animal like protist, as well as what specifically makes an invertebrate an invertebrate. So, animals are multicellular, meaning that they're made up of tissues and cells that work together. The adult is typically diploid. Remember that means that they have two copies of the DNA. They have two copies of the gene. And they usually have some sort of sexual reproduction. There are two major groups of animals. We have invertebrates and vertebrates. Invertebrates are the ones we're going to talk about today. They have no backbone. They evolved first and far outnumber vertebrates. Every time we find a new species, generally they are some sort of invertebrate. There's something small and no backbone. Usually it's an insect. So to better understand animals, we need to understand their layout and their embryonic development. So symmetry describes how animals are laid out around a central point. There are three types. We have asymmetrical, which means that they have no particular symmetry. So no matter how you cut that in half, it's not going to have equal halves. We have radial symmetry, which means that they are based around a circular organization. Think of it like the radius of a circle. Starfish, medusas, and polyps from the jellyfish all have radial symmetry. And then we have bilateral symmetry, and bi means two, and that means that they have two distinct halves. They have a left side and a right side. So embryonic development, when we talked about evolution, we discussed how embryos develop in the same way. There is an exception. Whether you develop your mouth or your anus first is the exception. So why does this matter? Well, why do we care whether you develop your mouth or your anus first? Well, it shows an evolutionary relatedness. Protostomes are going to develop their mouth first, and deuterostomes are going to develop their anus first. Echinoderms, which are sea stars, develop as deuterostomes, and so do we. And that means that we are more closely related to echinoderms than echinoderms are related to other invertebrates. So there's many different phyla that we're going to talk about. The first one we're going to talk about are sponges. And you should know that the one on the left is what a real sea sponge looks like, and the one on the right is not. This is phylum Porifera, and they have sac-like bodies. They are filter feeders. They reproduce both asexually and sexually. And they're classified based on their skeleton. Some of them have spicules, which compose the internal skeleton. They're little stick-like projections. And some of them have spongin, which is a skeleton composed of fibers of a soft protein. So that's how we classify the different types of sponges. Next, we have Ctenophora, and these are going to be our comb jellies. You can tell by the way that they look in these pictures that they live in the deep part of the ocean, the abyssal zone. They are beautiful. They are made of transparent jelly-like substance called mesoglea, and they use adhesive cells to capture their prey, and that's exactly what it sounds like. It sticks to the prey, and then they can move it towards their mouth. Cnidarians are something that we're a little more familiar with. These are going to be your regular jellyfish. They have radial symmetry, and they're named that because of they're named cnidarians because of their stinging cells called cnidocytes. So this is how they capture their prey. You can see that there are two forms. There's a medusa form and a polyp form, and that's how they go through their reproductive stages. So you can see that the polyp form has asexual budding that can turn into the medusa form. It's made up of mesoglea as well. It has a mouth, and its tentacles have those cnidocytes. The medusa form produces both a sperm and an egg, which are then fertilized into a zygote. So these are cnidarians. Then we have Lophotrochozoa, and this is going to include the flatworms and the brachiopods. It does include mollusks, gastropods, cephalopods, bivalves, and annelids. So that means that it includes things like clams and mussels. It includes your slugs and snails. It also includes things like octopi. Cephalopod literally means head and foot, which when you think about an octopus, that's their biggest features. And they are well cephalized. And then you have bivalves and annelids. And annelids are going to be worms. The next phylum that we have are arthropods. And these are what we think of as bugs. They have segmented bodies. They have jointed appendages. They have exoskeletons made out of chitin. Remember, that's the hard outer shell. They have a well-developed nervous system, respiratory organs, and they undergo metamorphosis in general. Think of a butterfly going through the whole caterpillar, pupa, and then butterfly stages. Crustaceans are also going to fall under this phylum. We think of those as things like lobster and shrimp, anything with those jointed claws in the front. And then arachnids are also part of this phylum. Even though they have 8 legs instead of 6, their appendages are still jointed. They have exoskeletons and those well-developed nervous systems. Interestingly enough, ticks are an arachnid. The last one we're going to talk about are echinoderms. They have an endoskeleton. So instead of their skeleton being on the outside, their skeleton is on the inside, made up of spine-bearing calcium plates. And it includes things like sea stars, sea urchins, and sea feathers. These are going to be different from vertebrates because they don't have a spine. But they do have an internal skeleton. So again, showing that evolutionary relatedness where their skeleton's on the inside and they develop their deuterostomes, their anuses first. So if you have any questions, feel free to send them to me and I will see you guys later.